Hi, kids. These notes are about metaphor. I mentioned metaphor briefly in the notes on figurative language, and now we're going to have a whole lesson just on metaphor because metaphor is really important in literature. And I'll say more about that in a moment. So, you have metaphor in writing anytime an author is talking about two totally different things or two totally different actions in a way that makes it seem like she is comparing them or saying that they are similar. 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 In a way that sounds like she's saying they're alike. So she has to be talking about them as if she's saying that they're alike. And they have to be things that are really, really different. So it's not a metaphor to say, my Siamese cat kind of acts like a regular cat. But it would be a metaphor to say, my cat is like a shooting star, or my cat is a race car. So, why do you find so many metaphors in literature? Writers love them. I call metaphors the multi-tools of literature. And see, I have a picture of a multi-tool here. If you don't know what a multi-tool is, you just open a new tab and search multi-tool, and you'll see tons of them. It's like kind of like a Swiss Army knife, but like even more elaborate. Metaphors accomplish many things at once that good writers want to accomplish. So, first thing that metaphors do is metaphors make writing moving. The same word goes in both of these blanks, moving, M-O-V-I-N-G. That means it gives the reader strong emotion. Writers want their writing to be moving. Metaphors are often moving. When you hear that, you might just like take my word for it, but you also might be thinking to yourself, what do you mean metaphors are moving? How are metaphors moving? And I'll tell you that imagine that you're praised or insulted, and then imagine that same praise or insult, but delivered as a metaphor. And notice how when it's delivered as a metaphor, it becomes more powerful. So if someone really values you, they might say, you're super important to me, and that might make you feel great. But if that person said instead to you, you are a treasure, that second one, you're a treasure, feels, it just hits you harder. Or if you flip it, let's say someone insulted you and said you're disgusting. That's hurtful, right? But then imagine that person instead of that said you're a pig. You're a pig is like even more hurtful. And again, that's a metaphor. Now, why should those metaphors be more emotionally powerful than just literally saying you are special to me or you are gross? Um, Personally, I think it has to do with the fact that they're vivid, right? You picture something in your head when you hear it. They're more exaggerated. They're not literally true, so that adds to them being sort of kind of shocking. Um, but let's just accept that metaphors make writing more emotional, more moving. And so that's one of the reasons writers like them. Um, the next reason writers like metaphors is writers want their writing to hint at deeper meaning. They want their writing to hint at deeper meaning. And metaphors often have deeper meaning. To use the example of someone saying you're a treasure or someone saying you're special to me, if somebody says you're special to me, there isn't any hidden meaning there. But if somebody says you're a treasure, there are a lot of other things being hinted. Basically, all the things that a person would think of when they think of treasure are things that are being hinted. So what's being hinted there is maybe like you have great value, you are something a person would look for a long time to find, you are rare, you're beautiful to look at, you're something I would like to keep for myself and hide and not share with any other person. So basically, all the things that are true of treasure are being hinted when you say to someone, you are a treasure. So you put a metaphor in your writing and bam, you have like instant deeper meaning. The third thing metaphors do for writers that writers love is metaphors let writers make their writing original. Writers want their writing to be original, and metaphors are an easy way to be original. Now, let me give you an example of what I mean by that. So, Here's a poem, Kenneth Koch. If I asked you, like, what is the most unoriginal kind of poem that you could ever write, or story, it would be maybe something on the theme of love, like I love you, or a love story, right? Those stories are as old as recorded history. So if you were going to write something about love, if you were going to write something, the message of which is I'm so in love, how on earth could you possibly make it original, right? You feel like everything's already been said. Here's an example of a poem where the the only thing original about this poem is that it's a series of really, really original metaphors. So it's called To You. It's by Kenneth Koch. Look at the first couple lines. I love you as a sheriff searches for a walnut that will solve a murder case unsolved for years. That is a metaphor. He's saying the way I love you is like the way a sheriff would search for a walnut that would solve a cold case. Now, until Kenneth Koch wrote those lines, I would bet $1 million nobody had ever made that comparison before. My love for you is like the way a sheriff will search for a walnut that will solve a cold case, right? That's cuckoo. It's so unusual. It's original. So now the first two lines of his love poem, instead of being boring, like, oh, I love you so much, now they're totally original. If you skim through this whole poem, pretty much all he's saying the whole poem is I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. I mean, it's a little more complicated than that, but not a lot. What makes it an amazing poem is all the original metaphors that he uses. I love you as a kid searches for a goat. Here he probably means kid like baby goat. That's what I'm assuming anyway. So my love for you is like the way a baby goat searches for its mom. That's totally like, that's so weird. I've never read it before. I think I am bicycling across an Africa of green and white fields, always to be near you. So here he's kind of saying, the way I feel about you is like I'm bicycling across an Africa. That part by itself is weird. An Africa of green and white fields. Let's see, I believe you are as trustworthy as the sidewalk. I love that metaphor. It's original, but at the same time, it's like, how did nobody ever say this before? It's perfect. Yeah, sidewalks are super trustworthy. Like you don't have to look down to believe it's there. You just assume it's going to be there. I love you as the sunlight leads the prow of a ship which sails from Hartford to Miami. Brand new metaphor again. But, so basically, we've got this love poem that could have been really boring and instead is on the Poetry Foundation website because it is full of these like dazzlingly original metaphors. So when I say writers want their writing to be original and metaphors are an easy way to be original, if you're writing as a writer about a topic that you feel like has been done before, you can instantly make it feel brand new just by putting in a metaphor no one's ever heard. Now, at this point, if you're clever, you might be thinking, wait a minute, emotionally moving, deeper meaning, original, aren't those 3 of the 4 traits that you said literature usually has? And I will say, yes, that's right. The 4 qualities that literature tends to have are it is moving, it has deeper meaning, it is original, and the 4th one that really doesn't come up here is it's carefully crafted. Usually you don't have to work super duper hard to craft a metaphor, right? They're just a line or so of text. So that's why it's not relevant. Now, there are a couple different types of metaphors. I'll first scroll down and show you this image. I'm going to talk about regular metaphors, I'm going to talk about similes, and I'm going to talk about implied metaphors. So a regular metaphor is when the author just says, this thing is that thing. Here's a famous example from a poem called Hope is the Thing with Feathers by Emily Dickinson. Here she's saying, hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul, etc., etc., etc. She's comparing hope to a bird, which she calls the thing with feathers that perches, right? So thing A is thing B. My cat is a race car. That's just a regular old metaphor. Then another kind of metaphor is simile. Now, you have probably heard about similes in elementary school, and you may remember your teacher teaching you that you have metaphor on the one hand and simile on the other, and they're sort of like a pair. I'm telling you now that you're bigger and you're ready for more. Simile is actually a type of metaphor. This big circle is metaphors, and simile is a subtype. And perhaps right now you're thinking, mind blown, or, oh, my whole life has been a lie. I'm sorry to have to usher you into adulthood into this painful way. But yes, simile is just a type of metaphor. So when the author says thing A is like thing B, or thing A is as blank as thing B, that is a metaphor. It's the kind of metaphor called simile. Here, this is by, these are the first two lines of a poem, I believe, by Robert Burns. He's a Scottish poet. Oh, my love's like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June. He's comparing his love to a red, red rose. And he's using the word like, makes it a simile. So if you're looking for metaphors in your own poem, if you can find the word like or as in there, chances are there's a simile happening. Not always. We use those words for other things too, but maybe yes. Here's a third kind of metaphor. This kind's tough to spot. It's an implied metaphor. Basically, the author's saying thing A is like thing B, but thing B is not being named. Here it is right here. Two things are being compared, but only one of them is actually named. So look at this. I think this poem is by Pablo Neruda. It's called When the Moon Sails Out. I'm pretty sure. When the moon sails out, the church bells die away, and the paths overgrown with brush appear. All right, the relevant part here, you've got some other figurative language in lines 2, 3, and 4, but the relevant part is line 1. When the moon sails out. This is actually a metaphor. What? How can it be a metaphor? He's comparing two things. Well, he's only mentioning one thing. He's mentioning a moon. Well, but moons don't sail, right? What does sail? Sailboats. So here he is implying, hinting, right? To imply something means to like hint it. He's implying that the moon is like a sailboat. But he's not saying the moon is like a sailboat. He's just saying when the moon sails out. So he's comparing two things, a moon and a sailboat, but he's not naming the second thing. We had to just think for a minute and think, oh, he's saying the moon is like a sailboat. If you come to, so here's a common mistake that kids make when they're spotting metaphors is they spot some figurative language. And since it's figurative language, they think, oh, maybe this is a metaphor. Because a metaphor is a kind of figurative language, right? It has meaning, but it's not literally true. If you spot some figurative language and you're wondering, is this a metaphor? The only way it's a metaphor is if you, the reader, can clearly state the two objects or two actions, two nouns basically, that the author is comparing to each other. So here we can clearly state he's comparing the moon to a sailboat. And we know we have a metaphor. So ask yourself, if you're wondering, is this a metaphor? Test yourself by saying, can I clearly state the two objects he's comparing? Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is what makes good metaphors good and what makes bad metaphors bad. When people judge metaphors, like what are they judging them on? Basically, they're judging them on their originality. And the words that we use often to talk about good and bad metaphors are the words cliche and fresh. So cliche is the word that we use for metaphors that people have heard before. When you have a metaphor that when you write a metaphor that someone else has already written, other people who read it are going to recognize that it's a cliche metaphor. And if someone was going to judge your writing, that is the part where they would say, this could be better. A fresh metaphor, like fresh fruit at the grocery store, is a metaphor that people haven't heard before. And when you see metaphors in literature, they're usually fresh. You'll almost never see cliches in literature, in fact, unless they're in dialogue, because good writers avoid cliches. Because, as you may remember, good writers strive to be original, right? It's one of the qualities that makes literature literature. So as a writer, just FYI, if you're going to write a metaphor, don't write the first thing you come up with, because the first thing that you come up with is almost always a cliche. That's why it came into your head so fast, is because you already heard somebody say it, right? If you're going to write a metaphor, make yourself stop and think for 15 or 20 seconds and create your own metaphor instead of writing one you've already read. All right, now you're going to go find a metaphor in your own poem. And if you can't find one in your own poem, you're going to find one in the class set.